because he was taken down from the cross before he was properly able to be prepared for burial. And so they arrived there at the tomb, and a big earthquake begins to shatter the rocks and move the ground. An angel appears and tells them, he's not here. He's risen. The grave is empty. And they're terrified. They don't know what to do. This move of resurrection, this act of resurrection on the part of God into this world, literally shook the earth and everything else around it. Everything about this message of resurrection should shake our worlds. You see, this is a powerful story of an empty grave. We visited other places around the area today. We would find graves. We would find bodies. We would find pieces. We would find remnants still there. This shook the world. It's a wonderful story of a gentleman who was a great runner, along with another gentleman who was another competitor to him in the 1924 Olympics. Eric Liddell and Harold Abraham. If you know the story of Chariots of Fire, the movie that came out in the 80s, it tells the story of these two gentlemen who run a race. This race is a very significant race in their lives, and it's very reflective of who they are. Harold Abraham comes to this gathering at school and discovers a strong anti-Semitism response to his culture, his background, his life. And as a runner, he begins to get passion and energy and drive out of this prejudice that he comes up against. A social issue that in his day was very contested, very hot, very volatile, and it brought about great passion, great movement. On the other hand, Eric Liddell, who is the other runner, he comes from a Christian background, a Christian home. Actually, his parents were missionaries in China. And Eric found this passion for running that he discovered was something very different for him. This running was a passion out of running for God. He discovered that this was a gift that he had, and this was kind of how he was made, who he was made. And when he comes to the 1924 Olympics, on his way there, there's a very powerful story that occurs on the train when he travels there. And they give word of when all the different races are going to occur. And one in particular that he had trained for all his life, the qualifying match was on a Sunday. And Eric had committed that Sabbath would be true of him. That there was something that had taken place on a Sunday morning, that this resurrection message had so shaken his life that he wanted to follow in line with the commandments, the invitation, the guide of who God was and what God called him to be, into a life that God had called him to do and to live. And in the midst of this message, he discovers and realizes, I can't do that. I've made a commitment. I've made a commitment to do something that I will not violate. And he chooses not to run. The very race that he prepared for, the very thing that he committed to, because his life had been shaken by an empty tomb, he made a very different life choice. The movie and the story unfolds is really powerful and pretty amazing. I invite you to watch it sometime if you'd like, or read the book. What is really powerful to me about it is you have two men driven by certain passions. And I think we are people today in this world and our culture that are driven by many different passions. Many things that take our attention, that seek our attention, that want us to do things. Everything from family and relationships and friendships, health issues, good and bad, professional pursuits, and those things that we call great or success. Our spiritual lives, how we pursue and what we do to fill those gaps in our life, and to find that satisfaction, to find that peace, that rest that wholeness. I can only imagine that when Eric Little got that information, that knowledge, about having not being able to run this race that he had trained all his life for, how devastating he must have felt. But what causes someone to make that kind of choice to say, no, I will not compromise my convictions, and instead make a different choice? That is profound in our world today. And there may be people in your own life that you know of that have convictions about things that, because that is who they are, it's the core value of their essence, they make those choices, you respect them. There's honor that comes out of that. We're amazed. For Eric Little, that was the case in this race of the Olympics in 1924. This passage this morning is the same way a story, in my opinion, of a conviction, of a passion, of something that earth-shattering, that wakes us up, that rattles our cage. You see, resurrection was something they had talked about. It was an idea. Over the season of Lent, the last 6 weeks, this community of faith here has been talking about those things in our own life that we say are good ideas, but yet we struggle to put into practice. They haven't become the core value of who we are, the strength, the bedrock, the foundation on which we stand, principles that guide our decisions and life-making actions. And so we've been giving attention to this love and grace of Almighty God. And this story this morning of women going to a tomb that maybe you've heard 1,000 times, or maybe it's fairly new, or maybe you're just tired of hearing it. Let's be honest. Sometimes it just becomes over and over and over. I want to invite you to think about something a little bit different this morning. In a few weeks, I'm going to be running a race. Someone actually asked me about it this morning already. I'm going to be running a race called the Savage Race. If you're familiar with it, so maybe nodding your head right now going, he is insane. I'm pretty sure I am. As I told some folks before, I basically got signed up by a friend of mine. He's like, let's go do this thing. I'm like, that's a great idea. And I had no idea what it was. And got me realizing this is like 5 miles of cross-country running, plus obstacles, including barbed wire, ice water, tear gas, mud pits. I went, Jordan, I'm not so sure. Now, in preparing for this race, I needed to obviously do something like Eric and Harold. To begin to prepare the race, you got to train, you got to eat well, you got to make sure your health is in order, you might even make sure your head's screwed on straight sometimes. But you got to be prepared. And matter of fact, as I'm thinking already for 2 weeks from now, I've got some things coming up that week ahead, but I'm going to start making sure I'm eating right. Because I know that I got to have the energy, everything about me, it's got to be ready, so I can be 100% there, maybe even 110% there. And it doesn't matter that I can go out and run 5 to 8 miles, like, there's a mental element. I think there's even kind of a spiritual element. There's a sense of focus and dedication I've got to have. And so our culture, our world tells us that if we're going to accomplish these kinds of things, we need to be prepared. We need to kind of fill our tank and get everything in order. This story this morning actually tells us something radically different than that. This story this morning tells us that when it comes to our life, especially our spiritual life, we're actually supposed to be running on empty. We should be running on empty. Now, when your gas gauge gets to empty in your car, you know you can't go much further. Maybe your car ticks down the miles to empty, to you're on the side of the road empty. And we know at that point something's got to change. And we typically kick in some kind of action. We typically jump in there and make something occur. This story this morning is a reminder that we are to run on empty. The emptiness of a grave. The emptiness of the one who has overcome death. You see, the way we tend to fill emptiness in our life is we try to work harder. We try to engage relationships differently. We try to think a little differently, try to figure, strategize, or whatever. Instead, the people in this story are caught off guard on They're not sure what to do. And really, I think it comes down to more of an action that's wrapped up in looking at this way of us saying, we need to stop trying to figure out ways to do something about the emptiness, about the hollowness, about this thing, this empty grave. And we need to rely upon what God has done. You see, that's actually the story of Eric Little in those Olympics in 1924. He had made core value commitments of his life. And it was because of this thing called the resurrection that changed who he was. He ran on empty. He ran on the resurrection, not of what he had done or something he had created, but what God has done in the resurrection. And I want to tell you what I think God has done for us and for our lives today. If you will seek to follow after, and this is your passion of following this Christ, this one who has overcome death, it changes our perspective of living. When we get to this point of life where health begins to fail or struggles come about and we know friends, as a matter of fact, in a moment we're going to share some prayer concerns, celebration, and burdens. We might talk about those that have health issues. It begins to change our perspective. That death is not the end. It may not be difficult, it may not be easy, it may be difficult, but it's not the end. You see, the other ways in which we try to fill the emptiness in our life too is be really busy. We try to put things in place. So we kind of avoid and ignore the things that really matter. We get a really full schedule. I was deeply convicted a couple weeks ago. Our greatest response as Americans is to tell people how busy we are. Oh, I'm so busy. It's just so so busy. Got this going on and that going on. I got one here and I'm going to try to get the third thing. We're so busy. You know what's really happening is we're avoiding. We're running away from emptiness, being still, and trusting the loving God who has a life for us that we're running from. We're avoiding it. But instead, it's life-giving. It's fulfilling. It's satisfying. And that's the thing Eric Little said in his running. He goes, when I run, I sense, I feel God, and it brings me pleasure. And it brings God pleasure. He lived into the fullness of who he was because of who God had made him to be. But he had to get to that point of living, running on empty. Are you there today? Because this message, this time, this service, the songs you've heard, the prayers that are prayed, the things we will talk about, these new life and Easter eggs and these lilies and the flowers and all that go on, it's new life that invites us to empty out the things that we're filling in the space that God has for our life. That's what we do. We like to avoid. We like to be distracted from stuff and get on about those busyness. But Almighty God has invited us into a very different place of living. I want to invite you as we now begin the Easter season. Today just kicks it off as we get to find ways to live into this running on empty. I want to invite you to leave behind those things that you're filling into that God space in your life. We've been talking about practices of prayer and Bible study and fellowship and worship, serving the community, habitat and children's ministries and food pantries. Those are the things we talk about. See, friends, those are the ways of running on empty. You're invited this season to run on empty because an empty grave has overcome death and given you life. In the name of the Father, the resurrected Son, and the Holy Spirit.
We're choosing celebration, breaking into freedom. You're the song of our hearts. We cast aside our shadows, trust you with our sorrows. You're the You're the song of our hearts. We're dancing to the rhythm of your heart. We're rising from the ashes to the stars.